IVM.
Sometimes it feels like all the weight of the world is fallen onto my shoulders, and it usually happens on my downtime while I'm enjoying a nice game of cricket. It's like my family realizes that I'm watching cricket and just rush to ruin it for me then. My mom will come in ranting about some problem with the neighbors. My wife will come in shouting about how we need to redo our kitchen, plus also some problem with the neighbors. And my daughter will come in angry at me because the color of the new car we bought is not what she had wanted, which is apparently the biggest crime a father can commit. Plus, of course, some problem with the neighbors. If only things could be just the same, even if something were to happen to me. Unless www.hdfclife.com, select, done. Things aren't so bad after all. Live calm. With HDFC Life, click to protect life. The Life Protect option protects your family from financial uncertainty. Visit hdfclife.com to know more and for terms and conditions.
Welcome to Think Fast, where it's a lovely Saturday morning when we record this and you're reading this, or rather listening to this on a lovely Wednesday morning. Amin Sayani is back. How are you doing? How has your week been?
Amin Sayani is back. I really need to listen to what this guy actually sounds like. Though Varun, congratulations.
Have you not heard All India Radio while you were growing up? Even though you were after my time.
That soundtrack was like the soundtrack of my life. Don't you remember?
I'm sure you would have heard voice. I'm doing a very bad player.
Acha. Okay, I need to, but let me research on Mr. Amin Sayani. How has my week been? It's been good, man. I think there's some sense of semblance coming back into at least the startup ecosystem. I think, with the Fed sort of going back to increasing its interest rates and sort of almost reversing their general way of functioning for the past 2 years, courtesy COVID and an anticipatory recession and this, that, and the other. I think that's basically led to a lot of changes within all things startup. I think the one biggest thing that's happened is the general exuberance, and I'm sure even you can tell, right? Funding news, those crazy rounds of 100 million at 1 billion and this, that, and the other. A lot of
Crickets.
Yeah, a lot of that has totally stopped, and I think it's for the good, man. I think it's high time, everyone sort of goes back to focusing on execution. And the impact of this is going to be manifold. I've spoken about this a bunch of time in the past, but I think one big impact is going to be the ludicrous salaries being thrown at people left, right, and center all of the last 6 months. Hopefully, a lot of that stops. But yeah, winter is coming. Startup founders, get ready to brace yourselves for a couple of interesting months ahead. What have you stumbled upon, sir?
What's been also interesting to see is that obviously there's a lot of action happening on the cricketing front, interestingly, and this is not going to become a sports podcast, but because you mentioned cricket, we have had this whole handover of Rohit Sharma taking on all 3 formats as captain. Then Twitter releases this whole Twitter GOAT thing where you can actually have a GOAT next to the GOAT, and Virat Kohli got it, and then there's a Rohit Sharma. There's a whole thing on Twitter right now, which is Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, and Dhoni fans going as to who the GOAT is, and I'm like, there can be 3 GOAT. But that whole thing happened there. But I think one of the sweeter things which I saw last night was that the Bombay Shaving Company guys, people from across their team have been sharing screenshots of any point of time in the match where in the background you can see the Bombay Shaving Company graphic in the background. So I think we talk about startups really taking over, the entire cricket side. You look at Byju's, look at everybody else. All the sponsors now are new age companies, not necessarily the old school ones. But this is really nice to see that it was just one of those things where, they're all really fanboying about the fact that they were actually in a stadium. It was there in the background, and tons of screenshots being shared yesterday. But yes, I will stop this from becoming a cricket podcast.
Yes, we could make it a football podcast because Chelsea is also getting sold and the commanding price is $4 billion, which no one is going to pay. But
Ashneer
good luck
Grover,
to you,
my
Russian
page.
oligarch.
Ashneer Grover, if you're listening, this is your next shark deal.
Yes, jump in.
But tons of stuff to talk about today in our new format, and now in our new day of airing. We now move to Wednesday, so we take enough time on what's happened over the week and record on Saturday, so you guys can hear this on a Monday. So what are you talking about this week?
So this week, guys, I'm going to be covering three super interesting topics. One is the rise of mental health apps in India, and also, sort of like juxtaposing it to what's been happening in the US, and interesting sort of like business models coming out of there. The second thing will be pets as a category. Obviously, we've seen the rise of a lot of startups within pets as a space, from pet food to pet services. So a little bit of that, and finally, we'll also be sort of rounding up with Bharat Pay, owning your own narrative, and really lessons and learnings from the quote unquote Ashneer Grover experience. So we'll be rounding up with that. What are you covering?
There's this whole conversation around duration of content on social media. So while Instagram discontinues IGTV and goes more all in on reels, TikTok's now extending and testing videos to go up to 10 minutes, how the subscription model itself is evolving on social media. So I'm digging into that a little bit. Inox and Esports Federation are going to screen tournaments. So that's an interesting one. Talk about how esports really become front and center now. And finally, it's being looked at as it has to be looked at as a legit alternative to regular sports. And Twitter's finally looking at India as a growth market. So tons of stuff happening we spoke about LinkedIn a while back, and now Twitter into it as well. So yes, we're going to talk about all of these things and more, but we'll take a short break and be right back with Think Fast.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcasts website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where we are thinking fast and talking about lots of random things. Not random things, relevant things, but yet in our own random way. We're going to kick off with Suchita talking about mental health and mental health apps. Whoa. What have you dug into this?
Yes.
Have you done meditation ever?
Never, shockingly.
Did you?
I mean, I used to do a lot of yoga. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that I've actively not done. You know what I mean? Like some people are very humse na hoga. For me, it's just something that, I haven't necessarily wanted to try so far, though I really should, because after dipping my toes in all things stoicism, meditation seems to sort of be the modus operandi. But I know you're a big, and not to equate all of mental health to meditation, but I know you're generally much more woke about this space. So why don't you give us your experience using all of these apps first?
So I've actually sampled almost all of them. I've used Headspace in the past. I moved to Calm, which I use now on a daily basis, a bunch of stuff on Calm, which I use. I've used a bunch of stuff like Inner Hour. I've checked that out as well. I use the Apple equivalent on the Apple Watch. Interesting space to see how it evolves. It's evolved from just okay, we'll just have music, or we'll have one templatized thing with a few variations on how to meditate and kind of feel mental health. But people have evolved it to many other things, right? You can equate it to finding a therapist. You bring it out saying, okay, can you have meditation for specific needs, like for anxiety? Sometimes when you're walking, people are asking for meditative experiences. But most interestingly, a lot of action happening globally. But what have you dug about the action happening in India right now?
Yeah, so basically, obviously one of the biggest use cases of mental health apps more specifically is, unfortunately, mental health continues to be a bit of a taboo topic, especially once you sort of, get out of your typical urban sort of cities and typical urban constructs. And of course, the second big challenge in India is just the utter lack of competent psychologists and psychiatrists to even deal with or help with mental health issues, right? So it's basically a combination of the stigma attached to mental health issues, as well as the scarcity of good quote unquote supply on the psychiatrist psychologist side, that's obviously led to adoption of mental health apps. The more famous app amongst all of this is one called In Hour that you just referenced, which was started by Amit Malik, and it actually has raised money from Lightbox and a couple of other fairly well-reputed investors. And he, in fact, as per Tech Circle article, he basically said that in an hour saw a 300% increase in downloads in 2021, with the app being used by 3 million individuals apparently right now. He also said that about 60% of his users come from tier 2 and sub-tier 2 cities, and there's been a near 300% growth in teletherapy services as well. So I think what's really interesting within this space is, there's obviously one is your teletherapy, you book an appointment with a psychologist and there's, an interaction over the call for a specific time period. The other thing that's also happening within this space is chatbots. So, and again, the overall goal over here is how do you really democratize access, right? And how do you make it easy for folks to have engagements while obviously managing two parts of the spectrum, one being the taboo associated with the topic, and the second also being mental health is such a wide spectrum, right? You've got everything from like anxiety to actually like clinical issues, whether it's, a bipolar, schizophrenia, etc., etc. I mean, you've got this whole spectrum of, what ends up being sort of thrown into the quote unquote, mental health bucket. Obviously, the interesting thing over here is, even if you look at the US, mental health has actually fallen under the general sort of umbrella of wellness. So, for example, like in India, there was an app which was launched by Pankaj Chadha, who's the co-founder of Zomato. He obviously left that to start a company called Mindhouse. Mindhouse was also sort of, tapping into this like meditation, mental wellness kind of space. They actually pivoted out of that and they, have rebranded themselves into a company called Shift. And Shift is doing everything from meditation to yoga classes to nutrition and looking at wellness as a package deal. So if I had to ask you, is mental health, and obviously, keeping the more scientific parts of it aside for a second, is it a feature or is it a product? Does it belong in one of the tabs of, like a Calm or a Headspace or whatever, or does it actually warrant having an identity, of itself, like what In Hour is attempting to do, or Better Help in the US is attempting to do?
So the thing is that, especially when it's therapy focused, when it's actually like, you're actually getting therapy through it, it has to be separate. People find, and here's the thing, right? If you're coming in with a certain problem which is in your head, you don't want to see too many things happening there, right? You want it to seem calmer. You need to open the app or the platform and feel calmer and not feel overwhelmed by the platform. And a lot of them have actually been able to do that really well. Like I've used InnerR as well. There was a point in time when I was trying to find a therapist because my therapist was fully blocked up, and I decided to just try InnerR, and I felt their UI and how they kind of took me across that process, while I eventually didn't end up using their therapist because eventually mine got available. I just found the process simpler. But what you said about access and taboo are the main things, right? If you have an app specifically for that, people are going to use it. It also makes it easier to for you to kind of talk to someone and not worry about, okay, someone's seen me enter this building. We also have like so many like random things about going to see people for mental health issues, right, in our country. And I think that's not our country, I think globally as well. But the interesting action, and I want to see if that actually builds up in India as well, is an app like Calm, which started off literally by giving you soundtracks for your life, where you would, like, I used to use Calm when they would just let me play like sounds of the beach in the background while I was working, because it was genuinely like good to zone out and work with that. And now they literally have masterclasses within it to live a more creative life, to learn stoicism. They have a new wisdom category where they've got Jay Shetty on as their chief purpose officer. There's a daily J, which as corny as that sounds, where you get one short 7-minute thing from him every day, which is really nice. Like I use it every day. And they have like a daily trip, which you can use when you're walking. They have stretching routines have started to come inside it, because they're saying you need to kind of stretch to kind of unwind as well. So over time, there's either that category, which is going towards wellness, but expanding this whole like mental meets physical. But I think what InnerR and some of the others are doing is really, and BetterHelp are doing, is that really focusing on therapy and how to democratize that. So I feel both will exist in different spaces, because I don't know if you want to merge both them together as much. But I think it's an important category which has been under-indexed for way too long. So I don't think it's a feature at all. I think these are products which can scale massively. Like imagine today, if I'm a BetterHelp or if I'm an InnerR, but I just set up I tie up with someone who has centers in major cities. So I suddenly will have an on-ground and an online presence. So you can almost transition your entire history of this to a licensed therapist who is there in a physical location. So the scope for growth is so high.
I don't know. I think I'm a little skeptical. I think the biggest challenge over here is on the supply side, right? The biggest challenge over here is the genuine lack of number of qualified, psychologists and psychiatrists, especially in a country like India. I think that's one. And second is, so for example, a Deloitte report titled TMT Predictions 2022 noted that India has only 0.29 psychiatrists and 0.07 psychologists per 100,000 people, compared with a median of 0.51 psychiatrists and 0.26 psychologists in other low and mid-income countries. So I think the biggest challenge over here, more than anything else, is going to be where the hell you're going to get the supply from. Because again, like, mental health is such a precarious topic, right? It's not like you and me. It's not like two friends talking, trying to get each other out of like a bad space. And also the understanding of how to deal with mental health is very, very complicated, especially in a country like India, right? That has its own. I mean, look at something like the US, right? Being a part of the LGBTQIA community is, to date, unfortunately, still thought of as mental issue, quote unquote, by a lot of folks. So you don't even know what this is going to get used for, and you don't know who's going to be. I think, like, prima facie, is investment in mental health interesting? Yes. Is it needed? Yes. I'm unsure of what the business opportunity over here is, just purely based on the supply side, and also, like, unfortunately, generally more regressive ways of sort of compartmentalizing things into quote unquote mental health issues, an example that I just gave. But let's shift gears into happier, more joyful things like Instagram and YouTube and everything else.
Also, what is categorized many times as really affecting people's mental health is social media apps. We've literally jumped from the solution to the cause.
Yes.
It's been an interesting time for formats and durations on social media. Instagram discontinued their IGTV app, which people forgot even existed. So it's not like they've discontinued something that had usage. People didn't necessarily use it at all. But they discontinued that because they've anyway merged a bunch of their video formats. Now they only have reels and regular videos. And over time, what Adam Mosseri has promised is they're going to simplify it further. And they're double tapping onto this whole reels format of 1 minute, which I'm hoping gets a little longer because it's trickier for many people like me to fit everything into a minute. On the other end, TikTok, which has famously started this format, is now experimenting going up to 10 minutes. And so people are like, okay, one second, YouTube has YouTube Shorts now. TikTok has 10-minute videos now. Who is what anymore? So creators are like, what is going on here, right? Because the reason why TikTok seems to be trying this out is you can't put too many ads in between reels or TikTok videos, but you can put a lot of ads in a YouTube video. So I feel it's obviously a business-driven decision, but what that brings about is saying, okay, how are all these formats going to coexist? Does it dilute a platform like TikTok to just have suddenly go to 10 minutes when you're trying to be YouTube while YouTube's trying to be you, and Instagram is trying to be everybody anyway. So what do you think about this whole duration conversation?
So remember, we'd spoken about this with Shefali as well. So listeners, if in case you missed out, we had this awesome episode with the wonderful Shefali Bhatt, who's a writer at Mint. And we had, also picked her brain about like long form, short form. I think, and I'll take a cue from what she said as well, right? I think at the end of the day, these are more platform decisions. I think after a point in time, like, users will consume wherever there is, good content to be consumed, right? So for example, like Netflix has a gaming section on it. Netflix is also, and a lot of these other guys are dabbling with, slightly more like shorter form content. So I think duration, could be a business decision. It could be an engagement decision. It could also be a way to help creators monetize better themselves, because again, even if I'm a creator, how do I make more bang for buck for the time that I'm spending creating my content on like TikTok or YouTube or whatever else? So I think this is like a good sort of formula for them to keep iterating with. I do think the biggest, like, the winner of all of this will be someone who looks at all of these decisions from a creator first lens. And I wonder who's doing that right now, right? Because even if you look at YouTube, making a long form content on YouTube is like an arduous process, right? TikTok just makes everything easier. There's a format, you have to follow the format, right? And obviously the format came from like Musical.ly or whatever. But I think the bigger question to ask over here is who's going to build all of these things out with creator first lens, and therefore who's actually going to be building tools to make it easy to create long form content, for creators, which is also like watchable by consumers, the other end of the spectrum.
But the long tracking right now saying that long forms is coming back in a big way. I think it's happened also a lot more because of live streaming, because live streaming has become an interesting way to do long form without the problem of editing. Like even like why podcasts are doing really well on YouTube, right, is because you don't have to edit them as much. You're just putting them how they are over there. You're just learning the algorithm. The good part about YouTube, though, which I feel like over time is still continuing to be the front runner, is because YouTube doesn't take knee-jerk decisions. They build things in a very robust way over the long term. And because of that, what's actually happened is that Shorts has blended in, I feel, in a very nice way into YouTube. It hasn't taken away from the YouTube experience. It's given people the option. And even from an algo perspective, because they segregated it into such a different format within the app and onto the platform, I think it's been great. What I'm interested to see is how Instagram develops this, because TikTok, I feel in many ways, is going to dilute themselves by doing this, because that is their forte, right? They've been able to catch that culture, and trying to do 10 minutes for a platform that's always done this is going to be tricky. Instagram has played in all directions anyway. So I feel that they'll always be that mid-level benchmark, especially globally, right? In India, obviously, they're much higher, primarily because TikTok doesn't exist here. But Instagram's going to still figure a way. But I feel the loser here might be TikTok if they go deep into this, because what you need when you have longer videos is to push a lot more towards subscription, which is what YouTube's a master at. And TikTok doesn't require you to subscribe as much as in just the algo pushing content out there. So it's an interesting space to watch, primarily to see how this evolves, how content is being created and monetized as well. But moving on to the next thing which you have, what do you have next for us?
Yes, all things pets. So
Yay,
you
my
have
favorite
one dog,
topic.
2 dogs.
I have 2 dogs. I grew up with 13 dogs. My grandmother had 13 dogs while I was growing up at home.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. No, so listeners, both Varun and I have 2 dogs each individually in our respective homes. And obviously, I'm sure you've also seen firsthand how much supply has come up in this category, right? Like I remember when we just got like Oliver, who's our like older dog, there weren't so many options. Like Heads Up for Tails was your, de facto sort of spot to go pick stuff up for your pets, or your local like pet store, right? And I think now like everything from organic, vegan, pet care shampoos to, pet food, which is becoming super interesting, to even pet services. Like there's this company called Flying Fur, and they basically show up with a van outside your house, and you can like give your dog to Flying Fur, and they like give your dog like a shampoo blow dry. It's like Urban Clap for dogs, right? Where something literally comes like right outside of your house. So this space has gone through like a massive explosion, and not just on the supply side but even on the funding side, right? But before we get into what money is gone where, what are the companies that have caught your eye? Are there any specific companies that you want to give a shout out to?
I think Heads Up for Tails has been like up there in front, right? Because I think they've really brought this experience. Because I remember like as a kid, and even when I was much older, trying to find a pet store which was not just a place you go to buy food or like dog leashes, because that was it. I remember growing up, that's what I saw in a lot of pet stores. And now to being this whole like experience, like I literally have a cafe across the road from my house, which is a pet cafe. They have a store, they have a cafe, we can come with your pet. Although it's a bad idea for my dogs because they're not friendly. They're like, why are you here? This cafe is mine.
Same.
Is there
My
standard?
dogs are the worst.
Not friendly at all. So I'm like, no point going to this cafe and creating World War IV. So I feel that the interesting part about how this space is evolving is also the fact there's so many options, right? I use a local Bombay platform called Petsy quite often. They're super efficient in terms of delivery times, options out there. There's also e-com solutions like them have kind of come up. But I think the most interesting part is the consumer, right? I think the consumer has gone from pet owners to pet parents. Once that mental shift happened is when these became businesses even looked at. So it's like how you have child care, now you have pet care in the same sense. It's far cheaper to have pet care than to have child care. Yes. I would say that that's the switch. I think that's what really blew up this market.
Taking from your point, just like calling out a couple of like data points over here, which is in India, for example, if you look at the pet care market, there's obviously dogs, which is a lion's share. So that's about 85% of the market. And then you've got cats, and then you've got fish, birds, plus, right? That's on the, category wise, sort of like the demographic wise, sort of split. In India, apparently, there are about 19 million pets in India. And on average, about 6 lakh pets are adopted every single year. here. What's also interesting over here is on average, Indian pet parents spend about 4,000 per month on pets. So again, a pretty high ASP, man. This is like, more than you'd be spending on like Zomato or Swiggy or whatever else. And what's interesting is in this overall mix, about 75 to 80% goes towards food and treats. And even if you did like a landscape analysis, right? So you've got platforms, you've got companies like Huft, which have gone retail first. So they've really gone, offline with their centers. And I think now they're sort of focusing more on their like website and their, Amazon, Flipkart, plus presence. So Huft is one example. There's another company that's recently come up called Supertails, which is a digital first, sort of like vehicle of providing pet parents with everything that's needed for their pets. But what's very interesting about Supertails is they're taking a more man matters type lens to it, right? Where what they're giving to consumers first is like services. So the services that they can provide, for example, would be, trainers or vets or whatever else. And then they're using that funnel to sort of go into, getting consumers to purchase more deeply through their platform. So starting with services and then moving into, products. And then, the third and the fourth kind of startups that you have emerging in this is, so the third type is just purely focused on food, right? So for example, there's a company called Just Dogs, which recently raised money from 6 Cents Ventures. And again, Just Dogs, for example, has taken only dogs as a market. So there are these like vertical players that are taking a specific type of pet and going deep. And the fourth thing was folks focused only on food. So for example, like the real incumbent over here would be Pedigree or, Drools and a couple of Purina. So for example, Nestle in fact launched their Pedigree competitor called Purina, I think 2 years ago. The last sort of bucket is food, right? And food really is where the magic is at. And even within food, the interesting things are like, I don't know if you guys have this in Bombay, but in Delhi, there's this thing called doggy dabbas, which is like customized meals for pets.
What?
It's really like fun. Yeah. Like it's like that food darzi for like pets, right?
Wow,
so
that's fun.
you can customize it basis. Yeah. So super, super interesting. So I think what's really like, interesting about this space is everyone sort of like dissecting the space in interesting ways. There's evidently enough money over here because it's a recurring spend. Those 4,000 bucks a month are getting recurringly spent across food, vets, etc. And what I really like about this space is everyone is bringing their own sort of, like way of like approaching the space, the 4 buckets that I just described, which is pretty cool. Like it's more interesting than a lot of things happening on the consumer front.
And I remember talking to Rashi, the founder and CEO, heads up for Tails, right, on Advertising is Dead a while back. And she really spoke about, she came in as a consumer who didn't have a solution when she set it up. And one thing she spoke about is also the community aspect. The community aspect for this consumer is so strong. It's far stronger than anything you've seen. Like when our dog needed blood, for instance, it was like the number of people who reached out within minutes was crazy. It's amazing to see.
Yeah.
And genuinely, like there's a lot of warmth in the community as well. So I think that really helps this category grow, because you suddenly have people who are really involved, passionate, and really want to drive it. Like you mentioned vets and care. I feel that's one strong part of growth, right? Is that we need more and more clinics kind of coming up, which are built not as like, drab hospitals. Again, I go back to, I grew up like there were cattle next to where dogs were, because that's what government vet hospitals are like, right? All forms of animals are there. So it's finally, I feel that's a great category which will grow more, which is going to be the actual medical care part. It already is, but I feel that's an interesting one to watch out for as well.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to take a quick break and come back to talk about esports and I know.
Don't you think that if everyone around you is getting smart, you better be smarter? Hey there, I'm the traveling professor Siddharth Deshmukh, and I'm back with season 2 of my podcast to make you smarter. Smarter with Sid. What's this season's focus about? Well, it's about 10-minute nuggets that will make you stand out at work. It's time to go from smart to smarter. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday and become smarter with Sid.
Welcome back to Think Fast. We're going to be digging into all things esports now. Not really all things esports, but talking about how this tie-up between Inox and esports. Have you consumed any esports? Are you part of any gaming communities? What's your scene with esports?
None at all.
Do you game?
Zero. Nada.
Have you gamed?
Nope. Unless like, code games or like Uno counts. or like dumb charades.
You've not even done
So-
I'm going to go like load. People are going to slap me for saying this. Have you done Wordle?
Oh God, yeah. Thanks to our producer, ma'am Jalasmi, we were like, we tested out Wordle. Dhruv is obsessed with Wordle. I don't think Wordle counts.
I
You're
know.
going to
I meant to
really
like another
get
zone.
shat on for this.
Yeah. So I said at the risk of being shat on. So I was just trying to figure out. But so the interesting part about esports, right? For the longest time, and this is like if I go way back, even when I was in school and college, there were still tournaments. People were like, you go back to people playing like cricket and FIFA. FIFA still has been one of the core ones there. You go back to Counter-Strike being a thing. Versus now when it's actually legit, there are like globally stadiums which get filled rather pre-COVID when people were having gaming tournaments, etc. From an Indian context, it still wasn't as big. Interesting enough, Rohit, my co-founder at Glitch, used to be in the gaming space. That's why his handle reads mad_toothbrush because that was his gaming handle. When he was in school, he used to game in actual tournaments. But because that was not a legit career at that point, he decided to not continue on that path. So, I mean, there was an entire, I remember even like early on, there was Pepsi who had pushed a bunch of this stuff. Again, not me reminiscing about my younger years too much, but now you come to the point where an Inox has, tied up with Esports Federation to screen tournaments. When you also look on the other end about what's happening with traditional sport, where in many ways it's become like a regular thing, right? It's not like there's no sensationalization around regular sport anymore. So esports and regular sport have merged into one whole thing. What do you think about this whole space, and what are your thoughts on the whole esports normalization rather than phenomena? Phenomena's been around for a while.
I obviously haven't looked into this space and I'm definitely not a consumer. I think, with there being like more internet penetration, with folks spending more time online, the growth of esports was, only bound to happen because it is one of the core use cases, right? Even from like an information and an entertainment perspective. And, again, like you said, I think it's definitely not just here to stay. I think there'll be more interesting like manifestations of esports outside of, the more like obvious sort of, applications of it. And I think especially with, the popularity of platforms like Twitch, Discord, one is like chat, the other is more streaming oriented. But I think this general space of like people coming together to play is only going to grow from here. I remember a couple of years ago, this was pre-COVID, in Delhi, there used to be e-sporting like tournaments. There's this place called SX Farms, which, folks listening in who are from Delhi, you'll know what I'm referring to. But there'd be like literally these like e-sport get-togethers where these, sweet little boys would turn up with a lot of like enthusiasm to, show their like chops. So I think the space, pretty much like what we discussed earlier, pet care is only going to grow. And I think these partnerships with, obviously the cinema halls and theaters who've been destroyed for the past 2 years only makes sense. Like, remember we spoke about PVR launching Pristine, their like urban clap-ish service. So if this is a way to, bring in more younger, relevant footfall, seems like a win-win on both sides.
That's actually an interesting point, right? If you're looking at theaters moving from being just for movies to now being almost like community centers, right? You're going to have esports tournaments, because the interesting part about this specific tie-up is that it's not only going to be for screening of tournaments, but you're also going to have tournaments happen there. So, and especially focused on, the fact that a lot of the talent really comes from tier 2 and tier 3 towns. A lot of your gaming talent comes from there.
Correct.
Global esports, for instance, one of the guys really leading the charge on this front from an Indian context have been doing this for a while, right? And I remember talking to the co-founders there, and they really spoke about the fact that and this is like way like 2 years back, 3 years back, they were actually taking up apartments in cities like Bombay, Delhi, etc., getting talent from other cities down here, have them all live in one space, train together. It's almost like a sports boot camp, right? You're training them for tournaments and stuff like that. So that's been happening on the sidelines for a while. But when you get into the spectacle, which is actually in a space with an audience, screening it, etc., that's when you become larger than life. That's when you can actually have a player really, people already have fans online, but I still feel physical in many ways. It makes things a lot more exciting for people, for the audiences, for the players as well. So I think this is a move in the right direction. I mean, PVR did this last year, right? They tied up with Nordwind Gaming, the esports company as well. So if you look at this going ahead, maybe we'll see movie theater chains no longer being called movie theater chains. They might just be community chains in that sense. It might be a good thing. We might finally have community centers.
Yeah, actually, I have a quick question for you over here, which is, what's interesting is there's this offline play that you're talking about, and fortunately, there's also like an online play happening, right, with Turnip and Router, raising the kind of capital that they have, more so for like online, streaming. What are the other things that you think need to happen in this ecosystem for it to really explode and become as mainstream as, say, for example, the IPL has become? Because this could very well venture into like, Kabaddi Premier League or IPL plus plus.
I think it is largely mainstream. The problem is it runs in parallel to traditional sports. Cricket has become the daily soap of sport, right? Every day there is a match. No matter what happens, the Indian team is playing someone, and it's bizarre to see how it's become that. In the same way, esports is running parallelly as this thing where you can go on to, let's say, a Twitch, go on to a router, you can stream and watch so much over there. Over time, I feel these worlds will merge, but I don't. What will really help is more legitimacy in tier 2 and tier 3, which right now it doesn't have. It's still only online or metros. From a physical standpoint, I feel physical will really help. It's like, why do they have cricket matches in a Kanpur, in like Dharamshala, for instance? It's because they suddenly want local crowds to consume the sport. In the same way, once you start having these tournaments at this scale in tier 2 and tier 3, that's when you they
it
will
just
merge.
creates more
Is what
legitimacy,
I see.
basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I see it going. Speaking of
Super
legitimacy, you have a point about how people can be legitimate
my
in today's
God.
narrative.
So I think obviously,
Can I
if
just
you
pause for a second?
unless you
And
live,
can we mention
Yeah.
a moment of silence for Rahul Shivshankar, for
oh my God.
for Mr. McAdams?
Speaking of not owning their narrative, Rahul Shivshankar and Mr. Arnab Goswami,
Mr.
national
McAdams. Poor
embarrassments.
Mr. McAdams has times now PTSD.
Oh my God, dude! I swear, I think that guy gets like hitchkeys, 24/7, thanks to like the number of McAdams jokes that have been coming out.
Poor guy.
That was an embarrassment. And, talking about all things embarrassing, I think generally the Bharat Pe saga has been embarrassing for everyone involved, right? From, in my opinion, and just evaluating this purely objectively from like a PR and narrative perspective, I actually think the ones who are losing right now are the investors, because even if all of their claims are legit, right? The thing that they haven't realized is that the founder in question over here has so much access to media by himself that he genuinely doesn't need to, go through like six hoop, have a PR person in place who's managing his image, because he's going direct to consumer, right? He's literally getting on TV channels himself, going on LinkedIn, going on Twitter, going on, Instagram, and going on podcasts, exactly, and saying what he has to say, right? And this guy, through his own network, probably has more reach than, one, any of his investors. And second is, the stories that seem to be like planted from both sides. So, but I don't want to make this conversation only about, Ashneer Grover and the never ending saga that is this Bharat Pay thing, which really needs to get off the goddamn news. I think the larger like takeaway, which I'd love your 2 cents on as well, is I think it's so easy for founders, especially, and I'm not saying this in Ashneer's defense at all, so I just want to park him on the side, but I think it's so easy for founders to get cancelled, right? And I think the weird thing and you saw this happen in the US in 2020, like, I don't know if you're tracking the news, but there was this like mass firing of female execs and female CEOs. The Away CEO got kicked out. Outdoor Voices CEO got kicked out. The Glossier CEO had like some major like thing happen with her. But basically, the Wing CEO, she got kicked out while she was kicked out of a company, I think right after she had delivered her kid. Like, there was just like this crazy thing happening in the US. And obviously the climax of this is like Elizabeth Holmes and Travis Kalanick, right? Who like Elizabeth Holmes genuinely screwed up, right? She was like a misinformation like that was fraud, right? Like that was like prima facie fraud. Travis Kalanick was, and I don't know if you're watching the show called Super
I still
Pumped,
haven't
but
started watching it yet. I also saw
the
the
first
trailer
episode's come
for
out.
We Worked, which is
The
the
Dropout.
one on WeWork.
WeWork.
Which is going to be on Apple
The
TV.
WeWork one. Yeah. Which has Anne Hathaway in it. But for example, look at someone like an Adam Newman, right? That he got out of WeWork unscathed. And we've also spoken about his masterclass in PR. Bro made money. Look at his masterclass in corporate communications that he delivered in that Andrew Sorkin interview, which we've spoken about before. But I think when you look at this whole landscape, right, of like founders who've literally been kicked out of their companies and founders who may or may not have been kicked out, but have found a way to live happily ever after, Travis Kalanick being one of them, Adam Newman being another. And I'm sure Ashneer Grover will fall into that bucket only. He'll be net, he'll be fine. I think the one big takeaway, at least for me, was how important it is for founders to really figure out ways to speak with, their quote unquote consumers in more direct ways, right? Versus waiting for some narrative, correctly or incorrectly, to be spun about you, in mainstream media, or like these like anonymous whatever, like tweet storms that end up, yeah. Or for example, like, what for instance, what happened in his case, now no one knows if that Kotak tape is, legit or not legit. He continues to deny that, he continues to say that that audio clip is fake, but sounds hell of a lot like him. You don't really know what's happened over there. But I don't know about you, man, but I think for me the one thing was that it's so easy for people to take one thing and use it in like 6 different ways, correctly or incorrectly, keeping that aside. And I don't know, I think at least for all founders, this is like a moment of like, I need to figure out a way to, like manage my own narrative if push comes to shove. Have you been having any of these like thoughts? I know a bunch of my friends have.
So the narrative is important, especially because now we live our lives on a public forum. We are on, when he signed up for Shark Tank, I feel, and I don't know if this happened, if I was an investor in a company and if the founder or the CEO is deciding to kind of go onto a public platform like a Shark Tank, I would want to have a say on that. I would want to have a veto on that in some way, like an Ashneer scenario in that sense, right? But what I feel is also interesting here is that how you own your narrative is also about how a company can actually leverage it, right, without letting it come back onto the company. So I think it's as much about individual communication and narrative as the company's narrative. The founder's narrative should not become the company's narrative in any way. In an interesting way, look at how Elon Musk uses his narrative, right? It helps, but also doesn't help many times. But I think the Tesla mania has largely been because of him really selling the dream. People buy his dream and he's built a great product that really helps. And he's been able to do that. But on the other end, if you kind of split that up in a smart way, like he has, like I think Tesla now by itself has enough legit fan base as Elon has his own fan base. I think that's the dream, right? Have your own narrative that's super strong, can help your company's narrative, but at some point you can break those two apart and nobody will really have issues. That's what we need to learn. I feel there's a lot to learn about how to build narrative from how stuff is happening in the States versus how we handle it here in many ways. And I think here also, because we handle it in a very knee-jerk manner, it's always, oh, how can you say this about me? And you suddenly do that. But you're not sitting back and saying, okay, 1 second, let me plan for worst-case scenario in everything which I will do in public. You need to literally have, like I do this personally. As weird as it might sound, I will sit down and say, what is my narrative? Because at some point, it helps me as someone who's an entrepreneur, business in charge, as well as someone who's creating content, putting stuff out there. What fits into my narrative and what doesn't. And if you don't sit down and do that, as you grow, you can tend to do random things and it'll affect you. If I start doing dance videos today, is that part of my narrative or is that me just being a senile uncle? Right. I think that's really
you are being a senile uncle.
Exactly. Right. So I think that's the important. I think that's the important thing to think about.
Yeah.
But and I also feel it requires a shift in mindset from communication teams as well. I feel that everybody has PR teams. Let's be honest. All these guys have PR teams. Are they getting the right kind of advice? Are they taking that advice is another thing there. Saying, how do we kind of build a structure into this system where it's not like you have to manufacture what you're saying, but you need to be smart about what you're saying. You need to have someone to bounce this off. This thing is only spilled off on him. Aman Gupta, on the other hand, has had it's the most positive push for him, right? Like Aman's really grown in the public sphere. You have an Anupam Mittal who's really grown. You see everybody else, Vinita Singh, Ghazal, everybody's gotten great feedback.
But dude, I think Shark Tank saved his ass, because if it weren't for Shark Tank, he would have just silently gone pummeled.
Yeah. So Shark Tank was bad for the investors.
Yeah, and it was great for him because thanks to the, following or whatever he has, he was really able to get the kind of support again. And I just want to reiterate that no one is condoning his behavior over here, right? Because, and we've said this multiple times in previous episodes, the company loses. Everyone will be fine, Exactly. Like Tiger Global, this is like a blip, right? Like Sequoia India, they'll be fine. They've got enough, unicorn bets. Ashneer Grover evidently has made so much money, he will also be fine. So I think obviously the big problem over here is, like the company and the employees end up suffering. But you're totally right. I think everyone, whether you're a founder, employee, investor, whatever you are, you really want to think through what are the things that you want to be identified by.
And you don't have to say
To the
everything on a
extent,
public forum. You don't have to say everything on a recorded
yeah,
line.
correct.
You can, I mean, as weird as
Yeah.
that sounds, we lived in a world before social media where not everything you did was recorded. And
One is that, and I think the second is like, people were and still are actually very scared of like consequences, right? I think the problem is like there is like this, 1 percentile on both the employee, employer, and investor side who has forgotten the type of consequences, that you could and the ramifications that you can deal with personally or professionally because of scenarios like this. But enough about, narrative violation.
the narrative for Twitter seems to be changing under Mr. Parag Agrawal, where Jack Dorsey had supposedly said that India was not a priority market for them for the longest time. This time, very clearly in their earnings call, where obviously they haven't done as well, but they're showing signs to moving towards the right direction. India's been prioritized. They're really focusing on India to, really grow Twitter. They also have a strong say here, right? But they haven't done much beyond Spaces, really. Interesting enough, while Clubhouse has kind of like died into oblivion from an Indian context, Spaces has really come back. I mean, I'm on many Spaces quite often. I'm listening to people. I constantly see stuff happening there. They've also got like an engineering team now in Bangalore to try and Indianize Twitter and grow. And are all on the sidelines, while obviously Instagram's been doing their own thing and YouTube's been doing their stuff for a while, where LinkedIn's doing their creator accelerator program, which they just launched right now as well. How do you look at Twitter and how could they grow from a business standpoint in India? Because they obviously have reach.
Yeah, I think the toughest thing for India, for Twitter in India, is going to be that they're overly reliant on politics. I think somewhere that needs to change, because as long as that's the case, people won't let them grow. It's that simple. So as long as they're like extremely overly reliant on, news cycles, I think that will be a big Achilles heel for them, because if they want to be reliant on that type of content, then somewhere their like business model in India needs to become more like focused towards subscription versus, how they're monetizing right now, which is largely through ads. And even from an advertising perspective, it's not like their revenues have grown considerably. I think they're in between that 17 million to 20 million annual revenue, which are like quite sad numbers for a platform that is, as heavily used, I would suppose, as Twitter. So I think if they genuinely want to take growth in India seriously, they're going to have to sort of figure out more like entertainment, buckets of content to align themselves with. So for example, like, in that conversation that we had with Shifali Bhatt, even she spoke about how Instagram is trying to stay away from news as a centerpiece of their platform, because a lot of like independent news folks have sort of, come up on Instagram in India. Because as long as that's the case, you'll see a lot of bots, you'll see a lot of fake accounts, you'll see a lot of like random cyber crapalooza happening. So somewhere Twitter needs to, it's almost as if they really need to rethink what their content strategy is and needs to be. And I think that's where maybe like investing in, better quality creators, investing in creators who are creating information about categories that are generally quote unquote serious but are entertaining. So for example, sports is an interesting category, marketing is an interesting category, advertising is an interesting subcategory, skills, like very LinkedIn type content is, where Twitter may need to go, where they can still maintain their like seriousness and authority and not just become yet another like short form video app, but they need to switch around their categories. I think that's paramount for Twitter India to grow without getting, like basically push back from any ruling political party.
I also feel that two areas they can really see revenue growth if they find the right ways to do it. One is obviously going to be Spaces, because that's become a great default for conversations. I've literally been on like launches of things, or like having like publications reach out where they want to talk about a specific thing in the news right now, even though it's news related, but you can ticket it, which makes it interesting. You can have ticketed events there. So I feel that's one great category for them to really focus on and grow. The other one, which they seem to have just kind of acquired and let just go, is Review, which is their newsletter platform. Because when you go onto someone's Twitter and if you have a reviews newsletter, it actually shows up on their bio. You can actually really be able to push that out. So imagine them going full Substack, which is why they acquired Review in the first place. And with people really pushing through, and if you look at LinkedIn, they've also launched their newsletter feature. Newsletters are going to be as strong. And especially if you anyway have as much traction with news, if you build legitimate newsletters, which people can even like pay on if they want to pay for, like have a freemium model there, that's where again money can kind of come in. So I'd say that two things they're already doing which can very easily be monetizable for consumers as well as for them. And then obviously you can build ads into it. Like imagine if I have a newsletter and I want to build ads into it, but Twitter helps drive that ad engine over there, and so on and so forth for Spaces as well. I think that's the two opportunity areas for them. I know they're bullish on Spaces. I've not heard too much about the newsletter one because it's still not as good as Substack. I almost thought of switching, but I just saw that functionality wise, a lot of stuff which I use on Substack wasn't there. So yeah, I think that's the other option they can really try out. But yes, that's what's happening with Twitter. And we have recommendations.
Recommendations left.
We're going to recommendations right after this short break.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcasts. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where while we were on break, there has been a news flash. Not news flash. I basically got sent an article while we were recording this and I saw it. I'm like, maybe we should talk about it. But basically, supposedly, after having lost Joe Rogan and a few others to podcasting platforms, YouTube is supposedly offering up to $300,000 to get podcasters to make video on their platform. So, an interesting thing to talk about maybe, but I won't be there to talk about it next week and the week after. Are you going to miss me, Suchita, while I'm away in Paris?
Varun. Traitor. Oh my God. Can you actually get me stuff from Paris? I'm like obsessed with the city.
Please tell me
There's
what
this lovely store
we'll have a
there
separate
called
chat
the
about.
Frankie shop.
You want a Frankie
Yes,
from there?
I will send you like a laundry list.
You want a Frankie from Paris? Frankie kharab nahi ho jayega?
Abhi no bhai, it's like a store. It's like a fashion store. It's very cool.
I thought it's like a
curation's
Frankie which
very,
you
like,
eat, like
hip.
the roll kind of Frankie.
No, I would not ask you to get a Frankie from freaking Paris.
I will dress really nice. I'll walk up to someone, and I was once in Italy and asked someone for a Jane pizza, just to understand if they ever heard that request before. He gave me an odd look.
Jane pizza.
Yeah. I just want to see if they make it.
Varun?
Not that I would eat it. I just asked for it.
I feel like
I asked these questions in other
I feel like you're
countries.
going to get punched in Paris. Like I can picture this happening.
Yes, I will. I will ask them if the Eiffel Tower is Vodafone or is it Idea.
Yes, congratulations. We will never ever hear from you again. But coming to recommendations, I have two very good recommendations. So basically, I mean, I know it's cool to like not follow the news and not care about what's happening in Ukraine, but I'm very like into understanding what's going on in the world. And there's two podcasts that I recommend for noobs who are trying to make sense of what's happening in Ukraine. So one is called Russia's War. It's on Radio Atlantic, and it's basically like a podcast that is run by The Atlantic, which is like a very well-known and well-respected publication. And essentially, one of the staff writers, Anne Applebaum, she's a gangster. Like she's like, like a OG, like kick-ass reporter. She sort of covers what's happening in Russia. So that's one. And the second podcast that I'd recommend within this light only is Russia's War on Ukraine, a Roundtable. It's on this podcast, which I've recommended in the past, called Honestly with Bari Weiss. Very, very balanced view of what's happening in Russia. It's not like pro-American. Like there's one guy in this roundtable who's actually very critical of America's foreign policy, especially under Barack Obama. So these are the two podcasts that I recommend you listen to if you want to make head or tail of what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. How did we get to this? And in a way which is not very like Western media. It's very, very balanced and good quality reporting. So that's what I'd request you guys
Just
to
one more
check out.
addition on that one is there's a creator called Johny Harris. Johny Harris used to be a Vox reporter, primarily focuses on deep dive journalism, but does it on YouTube. Great storytelling, and also gives like very clear information. He's done a video on this as well. He's even talked about what will happen if China invades Taiwan, because he's saying that's something that might happen, because as if one succeeds or one is actually seeing some traction, what will someone else kind of try as well, right?
Yeah.
So Johny Harris
Yeah.
is great to follow if you want to understand geopolitical stuff a little bit more. And my other one, which is beyond what is, I felt like two androids talking, but Mark Zuckerberg went on Lex Friedman's podcast. Both have a very robotic way of speaking, so it's very interesting to hear both them talk. It's very interesting to listen to because take away all whatever you feel about Mark Zuckerberg, but just the concept of how he looks at things and understanding where that mind is. Because let's be honest, Facebook still pushes the narrative of where a lot of us humans are today in terms of how we interact with each other, they're affecting culture and human behavior in so many ways. So very interesting podcast to listen to if you want to really dig into the mind of the Zuck in that sense. But those are my recommendations for this week. And I will see you guys in a few weeks. So don't miss me. I will be back. I will maybe get an accent.
Oh my God. Yes, French people don't talk like that.
I know.
But,
I spoke like an Italian person
on sounding.
Yes, I will not talk. I'll talk like a normal person. I'll be back in my regular dad joke self in a couple of weeks. But till then, Suchita, you're keeping the flag alive and we'll see who you get on in my place.
They will be better and younger. No, I'm just kidding. We will miss you, but enjoy your break and thank you for inspiring me. Hopefully, one of these months,
yes,
I will actually take a holiday myself because God knows I need it. No, but have fun and you better get me shit from Paris.
Yes, I will get it back. I will get back the Louvre, the triangle. Pyramid,
get back
whatever.
The Louvre.
Yeah,
Can you steal a Monet? If you can steal a Monet from Museum d'Orsay, I will be indebted for the rest of my life.
Okay, fine. We'll see if I can steal a Monet. Then you'll suddenly the next Robert Langdon novel is about how Varun tried to steal the Monet. But so that we don't digress further, before our producer slaps us on the face through virtual metaverse methods, that's it for this episode. I'll catch you guys in a few weeks, and Suchita will catch you guys in a week. Have a good.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Our storytellers and storytellers Vineet meets legendary singer Usha Uthup and writer Shrishti Jha, who worked on the singer's authorized biography, The Queen of Indian Pop. What happens when a Mauryan spy meets the chief soldier of the Kadamba Nadu on a dark night? Kavita Jiva tells us on the Venvel Zenni Tamil podcast. On Audio Gyan, Kedar talks to Mohar Roy, co-founder of Co-Design, about building branding systems. On Press Decode, Sarah Vakta and Prafulla touch upon the heartbreaking topic of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And on IVM Likes, Zalak asks Chalasmi and Antariksh about their thoughts on the movie Gangubai Kathiawadi. So, on a personal note, I wanted to let you all know that this week marks the 7th anniversary since I started IVM. I'm eternally grateful to the team we have here, especially Kavita Rajwade and Tejas Sringarpure, who have been here since the beginning. They've seen the struggles, our eventual acquisition by Pratilipi, and our continued struggles to make podcasting a large and thriving part of the media industry. We have the best hosts in the world, and I have to say that I'm so glad and so grateful that they have chosen to work with us. And finally, I'd like to say thank you to you, the millions of folks who have heard or watched our content. All I can say is, you ain't seen nothing yet. I hope you join us as we continue this journey. In the meanwhile, do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platform you're listening to. You can also check us out on YouTube. To get a list of all of our channels, you can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where you can go to all the channels. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, Max Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Duggirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcasts website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.